Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Draco Veritas. So, just like in my last video, I am going to state that all trigger warnings apply because as we go further and further into this fic, it's going to get darker. So, violence, death, self-harm, suicide, coercion, and things of that nature are going to keep on cropping up. So if those are things that you do not want to engage with, I suggest you sit this entire fic out because it's going to be here regardless. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Chapter 6. This Perfect World. The following day, Hermione woke early so she could get down to the armory in order to begin crafting Draco's new pensieve. Classes may have been over for the term, and the hallways were becoming more and more deserted as Christmas Eve approached. But still, she didn't relish the thought of asking Snape to use the potions dungeons to work. He would start asking questions, and they were trying to avoid that for the present. She had been hoping that Harry would have come down with her while she began the process of adding rosemary and dried forget-me-nots to her small cauldron, but so far he hadn't. The clock had just struck 7 when the door to the armory opened and Draco came in. He looked tired, but smiled slightly when he saw her sitting next to the table, working. "I didn't think you'd miss the opportunity to get an early start," he said by way of greeting, and pulled up one of the only other chairs in the room and sat down next to her. "How's it going so far?" "I'm almost done, actually," she said. Draco looked around the room. "Where are the others?" Hermione made an irritable noise and dropped the spider webs into the cauldron. "Sleeping, I suppose," she said. "You would think that they would feel some sense of urgency about this. After all, you know who could have acquired that cup thing at this very moment, and we wouldn't know at all." "Well, not everyone has the ability to get up at the crack of dawn and start thinking about impending doom," he said with a sly grin. "But then, you always were an overachiever." Hermione glared at him and tapped the edge of her cauldron 3 times. It rang like a bell and began smoking softly. "Very funny," she said with heavy sarcasm. "Excuse me if I have my priorities in order." Draco said nothing to this, only gave her a wan smile, and she went back to stirring her cauldron in a widdershins direction. He watched her work in silence, and as he did, the air in the room grew pleasantly warm. Probably from the cauldron, he thought, and he felt his eyelids slide closed. Soon he was dreaming. His father sat at a table which had been pulled up to the window and was absorbed in a solitary game of chess. The board was gold and ivory, the pieces carved out of whole rubies and emeralds. One team scarlet as blood, the other green as poison. By the window stood Voldemort, looking out over the landscape, at the bare trees that dotted an empty valley.
"Lucius," he said, "surely the time is nearly at hand."
"Yes, my lord," said Lucius, moving the bishop.
"In 2 weeks, if I am not mistaken." "That is good news. Time hangs heavily here. I grow increasingly bored."
The Dark Lord turned away from the window and looked down at Draco's father.
"How is the boy?"
he asked with an unpleasant smile.
"As well as can be expected,"
said Lucius, and moved the knight.
"It is now a matter of waiting, my lord."
Draco woke, but it was like swimming through cold black water towards a distant light. His head broke the surface of sleep, his eyes fluttering open, and then the rest of his body followed, shuddering awake in a series of uneven jerks. He moved slowly, letting his breathing still, the air striking his skin and making him shiver. He looked over at Hermione and found that she was staring at him in alarm. "Are you all right?" she asked. Draco opened his mouth to answer and noticed that he was soaked in sweat.
"I don't know,"
he said, and looked down at his hands. There was a faint bluish tinge to the nails that might have been cold or shadow. He curled them in against his palms and murmured a warming spell, which helped slightly. "It was a dream, wasn't it?" Hermione asked, although Draco suspected that she had guessed that from the moment he shuddered awake. He nodded. "Well," she said in a slightly unsteady voice, "the pensieve is ready. Would it be all right if I put those memories in now so that we could examine them?" Still not trusting himself to speak without shivering, he nodded again, and Hermione picked up her wand and held it gently to his temple. "Now hold still," she said, "and try to remember what you saw." Obediently, Draco closed his eyes, and images from the dream moved behind the skin of his eyelids. The castle again, rising from its black nest of pine trees, the diamond-like windows, the echoing, empty rooms, the tower and the shelf on which sat the mirror, the dagger, and the scabbard. There was a strange sensation on the tip of his head, like water falling in reverse, and Draco knew that Hermione had managed to gather the dream like transparent cobwebs on her wand. He opened his eyes then, and saw her drop the dream into the pensieve, where it swirled and glowed like a moonbeam. "There," he heard her say. "Now we should have the ability to gather as many as we like." She turned her head to look at him. "Did you see the cup this time?" "No," he said, finding his voice at last. "But all the rest of the items were there, like before." Hermione frowned. "I wonder if there is something we're missing," she said thoughtfully. "Something isn't quite adding up, and I think I should look into it more. Would you mind if I went to the library and got a few things?" "When have I ever said no to you before?" he asked, and Hermione pursed her lips as a faint blush crept across the bridge of her nose. "You don't have to come with me if you don't want to," she said. "You go. I'd rather stay here," he said mildly, and settled himself more comfortably in his chair. "Honestly, if I wasn't the one with the dream problem, I would be fast asleep like the rest of our gallant crew." A small smile pulled at the corners of Hermione's mouth at that. "All right," she said. "I'll be right back." Draco waved a lazy hand at her as she neared the door. "By all means, take your time," he said. As soon as the door shut behind Hermione, he looked towards the window and out at the cold winter day beyond the misted glass. The world outside was white and wreathed in silver ice. It looked so fragile, as if it would ring like a glass bell if struck. He briefly teased the idea of sending out a tendril of thought to Harry, searching the dark space outside himself for the familiar color and shape of the other boy's thoughts. But he didn't. He could find Harry as simply as breathing and speak silently as easily as he could speak aloud. Perhaps it was the ease that came with practice, but it was becoming scary. He wondered if the day would come when he could not tell Harry's thoughts from his own. He should get up and stretch his legs, but as he tried to get up from the table, he felt something strange in his limbs, a sudden heaviness, the likes of which he had never felt before. If he could have seen himself, he would have seen the planes of the cheekbones, the sharp chin, and the shadowed eyes widened in surprise. And it wasn't until Hermione returned, her arms laden with books, that he was able to get up from his chair at all. It was mid-morning by the time Harry finally woke up. He had slept late and knew he had missed breakfast, but the dream he had been having had held him firmly in its grip. He could remember a sandy beach and himself no more than 6 years old, using a red plastic bucket to attempt to rebuild a sandcastle that someone had knocked down. The work had been hard, and each time he had made progress, the ocean would come and sweep away all his work. Needless to say, he had not slept well, but rose and got ready for the day regardless. Dimly, he was aware that Hermione had said that she was going to work on Draco's pensieve this morning, and half hoped that she had waited until a reasonable hour to get started. However, a part of him knew that she hadn't, and had probably lain awake half the night going over the ingredients in her head. Smiling ruefully to himself, Harry finished dressing, then went down to the common room. With any luck, he'd be able to find her in the library, after he snagged something to eat from the kitchens. Downstairs, the common room was deserted, save for Ron, who was sprawled in one of the fat armchairs pulled close to the fire. The other boy looked up as he came into the room and waved him over. Harry came and dropped into the armchair next to him, and for a moment they sat and stared into the leaping orange flames in a companionable silence. It was Harry who spoke first.
"Sorry I slept so late," he said. "I was having a really weird dream." "That's okay," said Ron. "Sleeping in is what Christmas holidays are meant for."
He looked into the grate, where the warm fire was burning merrily, and the vivid flames painted over his already bright hair.
"Hedwig brought something for you while you were sleeping,"
he said, and began rummaging beside the armchair.
"I put it back here." "Thanks. Have you seen Hermione this morning?" "No. I think she must be off making that pensieve or something."
Ron sat back up, a small package in his hand.
"Here you go."
Harry sat up straight and took it.
"I'd almost forgotten I bought this,"
he said, tearing it open. Ron looked curious.
"What is it?"
Harry smiled as he began opening the package, in which a small box resided.
"You want to see?"
And he held a hand out to Ron, in which a blue stoned ring glimmered in the center of his palm. Ron sat where he was, staring down at Harry's hand. He made no move to touch the ring.
"Is that a sapphire?"
Harry glanced down at the delicately worked circlet in his hand.
"No, it's Venetian glass." "Who's it for?"
Ron demanded.
"Hermione, of course,"
said Harry, as if that should have been obvious.
"It isn't a Christmas present, is it?"
Ron continued. Harry blinked, looking slightly flummoxed by this hard line of questioning.
"Well, yes, but it's also—"
He hesitated.
"I suppose it's an apology present. You know, I'm trying to say sorry for being distant, for being difficult."
He hesitated and looked down at the clear blue jewel.
"I just want her to understand that my recent behavior doesn't have anything to do with whether I love her or not. I guess I couldn't think of the right way to say it, so—"
"No." Ron was shaking his head.
"No, Harry, that's stupid."
Harry blinked at his friend, then very slowly closed his fingers over the ring.
"Why is it stupid?"
"Because," Ron said roughly, and flushed to the roots of his red hair, "because you're supposed to give a girl an engagement ring when things are going well in the relationship, Harry, not when they're going badly. It's manipulative. It's not an—" Harry began, then cut off.
"Hang on. What do you mean, manipulative? I want to give Hermione something I think she'd like. That's manipulative?"
"Tell me you're not trying to tie her to you," said Ron.
"She's my girlfriend," said Harry. "We're already tied together."
"When are you going to do it, Harry?" Ron asked, his tone taking on an odd-sounding edge.
Harry shook his head. "I was thinking the day after Christmas," he said. "I think you should wait.
said Ron.
Oh, really?
Harry's voice was irritable.
Why's that? Look, Harry, it's a ring. And no matter what, you give a girl a ring, she's going to think you want to marry her. Well, maybe I do want to marry her,
said Harry, then checked at the astonished expression on Ron's face.
I mean, not now. I'm bloody 17. But that doesn't mean that I marry her,
Ron echoed, and there was a strange, tense note in his voice.
You can't.
What do you mean I can't?
Your relationship is falling apart.
Harry stared at Ron. His jaw was set, his shoulders rigid.
And I suppose you think you know more about my relationship with Hermione than I do.
Bloody anyone would! The amount you pay attention, said Ron angrily.
How much time have you spent with her these past months? You've been so wrapped up in your own little world, and you don't let anyone in except Malfoy. And if you don't see the way he looks at her, you're stupider than you look. You think you can just ignore Hermione, and she'll sit there and wait for you to wake up and start paying attention again? You think she'll be willing to let you treat her like she didn't matter?
Shut up, Ron, Harry shouted, losing his temper at last.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Ron sat bolt upright.
Bloody hell I do,
he yelled, so loudly that Harry flinched back.
I'm in love with Hermione, and she's in love with me.
A dead silence followed this announcement, and the package Harry had been holding fell from his hands. He stared blankly at Ron, and Ron stared back, equally blank. The expression on his face was one of stunned incomprehension, as if he could not believe the words that had just issued from his lips.
Why would you say that?
Harry said, his eyes like ice.
It's not fucking funny. If you want to make jokes, I'm not joking.
Ron's eyes were still dazed, but his voice was firm, and so was the set of his chin. He raised his face to Harry's.
I wanted to tell you, he whispered. I thought about telling you. Every night I thought about it. I must have told you 1,000 times, in different ways, in my head. And now you know.
He took a deep, shuddering breath and half closed his eyes. There was something in the simplicity of the words he spoke, in the expression of mingled relief and terror on his face that was inarguable. Another silence followed, broken by the sound of the portrait hole swinging open, and they both turned to stare. It was Hermione. She was smiling, her arms full of books, and the collar of her cloak pulled up around her neck.
"Hey, you two," she said. "What are you up to?"
"Hermione," Ron said, his voice fierce and wretched.
"He knows."
Hermione paused and blinked at him. "What?" Ron got to his feet. Harry remained very still, not moving. His eyes went from Hermione to Ron and back again.
"Harry knows," said Ron again. "I'm sorry. I know we were going to wait until Christmas."
The smile had begun very slowly to fade from Hermione's mouth. She looked from Harry's white face to Ron's set one.
"I don't understand," she said uncertainly. "What's going on?"
"Hermione!" Ron said fiercely.
"Don't you get it? There's no point pretending. Harry knows. I told him."
Hermione looked at him wonderingly.
"Told him what, Ron?"
"I told him," said Ron, speaking very slowly, "about us." Hermione's mouth opened slightly, and she stared at Ron. Then she stared at Harry. Her gaze went back and forth between them, and she resembled nothing so much as a small creature trapped between two much larger predators.
"Ron says he's in love with you,"
said Harry, in a flat voice, speaking for the first time since she had come into the room, and Ron flinched.
"And he says you're in love with him."
Hermione looked stunned.
"He said what?"
she whispered, still staring at Harry.
"No, he wouldn't say that."
Her eyes, enormous in her pale face, went to Ron. "It isn't true." Ron looked as if Hermione had hit him in the face. The blood seemed to drain out of his skin. He made a strange sound, low in his throat, staring at her. "You can do this," he said. "I know you're afraid, but you can do this." "Afraid?" Hermione echoed. "Afraid of what?" Ron spun around and stared at Harry. His eyes were huge, almost black with intensity. "I love her," he said, his voice thin but defiant. "I love her, and she loves me. We love each other. We've been together almost every night. Together in every way." "Ron!" said Hermione, her voice exploding out on a half-shriek. "What are you saying?" Harry looked as if he were going to throw up. "One of you better tell the truth," he said, "and pretty fucking quickly." Ron turned his head and looked at Hermione. "Come on, Hermione, it's time," he said. "Tell him you love me." Hermione's hands slowly clenched around the books in her arms. Her voice, when she spoke, was as fierce and cold as an ice storm. "I do not love you," she said, and her voice rose and rose, brushing the edges of hysteria. "Moreover, I have no idea what you are talking about. I have never been with you. I have never—" "You're lying," Ron said, his voice as astonished as it was angry. How can you, Hermione shouted back. "How can you stand there and tell such terrible lies?" "It's the truth." "I would never do that with you. Never!" Hermione's voice sounded shattered, a fragile glass bell buckling under strain. "Why are you doing this, Ron?" "Because I'm tired of lying," he shot back. "You're lying right now!" "I'm telling the truth." Ron's voice was thunderous. He turned back to Harry, who was standing very still, unmoving, his face entirely blank. "You believe me, don't you?" he said in a harsh half-whisper. Harry said nothing, only glanced down and then back up at Ron, expressionless, as if he were gazing at a stranger. Then he looked at Hermione, who started towards him involuntarily. He held out a hand, arresting her progress. "No," he said, and she stopped where she was. "Harry, you know I would never. You know I love you." There was a pleading note in her voice as she turned to look at Ron. "Tell him you're lying," she whispered. "It's not too late. Tell him." Ron didn't look at her. His eyes were on Harry, the lines of strain around them very dark. "It's the truth," he said. Harry looked at him with an odd distance on his face, as if he were regarding something that was happening very far away. "You're in love with Hermione? You've been together?" he demanded, his voice hard and sharp. Ron nodded. "Yes, like I told you." Hermione went white and swayed on her feet. The articles she had been carrying fell out of her arms, and she put out a hand to steady herself against the wall. She seemed to be beyond speaking. The skin of Harry's face seemed to have tightened, pressing back against the bones, but his voice was steady. "How many times?" Ron flushed. "I don't know. A lot." "Where?" Ron ducked his head, struggled, and said, "Prefect's meeting room." Harry looked at Ron, and somewhere inside his eyes was the 11-year-old child he had been, begging his best friend to say that he'd lied. "How could you?" he said, his voice flat and utterly toneless. "How could you do that to me?" Ron said nothing. He couldn't seem to meet Harry's eyes with his own. All the color in his face had gone, and he stood stock still. At the base of his throat, his pulse beat, fast and hard and visible beneath the skin. "Harry." It was Hermione, her voice a thin shell of itself. "Please, it isn't true." Harry turned to her. "Don't talk to me." His voice was fierce, his eyes like chips of green ice. "Don't talk to me. Don't look at me. Don't ever come near me again." Hermione's face crumpled. "Please listen." "I said don't talk to me!" Harry yelled, his composure cracking at last. "Harry!" Hermione said again, her voice a half scream. And then Harry's hand went to his wrist and ripped away the watch she had given him and flung it at her feet. Very slowly, Hermione bent down and picked up the watch. When she straightened up, there were tears on her face, although she did not move to wipe them away. She looked not at Harry, but at Ron, and her face was very white. "I hate you," she said. "I will always hate you for this." And then her voice broke, and she turned and ran out through the portrait hole. He had sworn not to do this unless it was an emergency, but he had begun to think that all this was exactly that. Sitting at his desk, Lupin reached for the brass-bound box and drew it towards him with a sigh. He opened it and took out a parchment, which he unrolled across the desk. He remembered Sirius asking him to make a new map at the beginning of term, handing him the last of the Zonko's reality pencils. He demurred. It was hardly something a Hogwarts professor wanted to have discovered stashed in his office. But Sirius was very persuasive when he wanted to be. "Just make a rudimentary map," he said. "One that shows the boys, at least." And so he did. As Lupin's eyes scanned the parchment, he saw the two blue dots that were Draco and Harry. The latter seemed to be sitting in Gryffindor Tower, while the former was making his way up from the Slytherin dungeons. Lupin sat and watched the progress of the second blue dot, his mind a whirl with confused thoughts, until it drew near enough to the corridor where his office was. Then he got to his feet and went to the door, slipping the map into his breast pocket. The hallway was empty, and for a moment Lupin almost rechecked the map. Then Draco came around the corner up ahead. He was walking with his hands in his pockets of his trousers, his silver head bent, but he seemed to sense Lupin's presence and glanced up as he rounded the corner. "Professor Lupin," he said, slowing down slightly. "Hi." "Hello, Draco," Lupin said. "Have you got a moment to talk to me?" Draco shrugged. It was an elegant shrug. Everything he did was elegant. Sirius, at his age, had had much the same panther-like grace. "All right." Lupin ducked back into his office, and Draco followed, shutting the door behind him without being asked. He leaned against it, and the faint winter light coming from the window showed the bluish shadows under his eyes. "What is it, Professor?" "The wedding," Lupin said, feeling it wise to start off with something safe, "is in 2 days, and since everything has been chaotic, I wanted to make sure you have everything you need." "Harry and I had our clothes tailored months ago," said Draco coolly. "We're fine." "And Harry, he is—" "Just say what you want to say, Professor," said Draco, rubbing the back of his hand across his face. "I know you know. Harry told me. You're worried about him." "I'm worried about you." Draco looked momentarily surprised. "Me? Why worry about me?" "Because you're obviously not doing well," Lupin said bluntly. "You look—" Draco's eyes narrowed. "I look what?" "Bad," Lupin said, and Draco immediately looked so offended that he was almost amused. "Ill, I should say," he amended gently. "You're pale, and it looks as if you've lost weight." "It's winter, and I haven't been hungry," Draco said. Lupin just stared at him. "Have you told Sirius about how I look?" Draco demanded abruptly. "I have told him nothing," Lupin said heavily, "although I wish it were otherwise.
as I believe he could be a great help to you."
Draco said, noncommittally, and looked at his watch.
"I ought to go. I know. Off to meet Harry, I'm sure. Won't that confuse the other Gryffindors?"
Lupin asked, somewhat amused. Draco lifted one shoulder and let it fall. "Harry doesn't seem to care about that much anymore," he said thoughtfully. "And since I'm persona non grata with the Slytherins—"
"Are you? Why?"
"The facade's pretty cracked at this point," Draco said. "Harry and I are friends. People know it. Word gets around. The Slytherins won't tolerate that. I don't blame them, really. And when I break it off with Blaise, that'll be the nail in the coffin."
"You're breaking it off with Blaise?" Lupin asked in surprise. "Is that because she was fooling around with Malcolm behind your back?"
Draco looked shocked. "Blaise was fooling around with Malcolm behind my back?" Lupin shrugged regretfully.
"Sorry," he said. "I figured you knew. Everyone else knows."
Draco was speechless, then seemed to recover himself, and snorted. "Don't worry about it. I don't care." Lupin raised his eyebrows at that.
"Well, in any case, I'm sorry about the Slytherins."
"Yeah," said Draco. "Right now, it just doesn't seem all that pressing." Lupin nodded and stood up. Draco looked at him apprehensively as he approached, and when he laid a hand on the boy's shoulder, Draco looked ever so slightly panicked, as if he wasn't sure what to do.
"I know there are things you aren't telling me," Lupin said gently. "And I know it can't be easy, but you can tell me anything, and it will remain in my strictest confidence."
Draco raised his face. The glare from the window struck through his fair hair, firing it to individual strands of white light.
"There is one thing," he said.
"What is it?" "Something Dumbledore told me," Draco said.
"But it's about Harry's parents, so you might not want to hear it." "About James and Lily?"
Lupin asked, drawing his hand back. Draco's face was impassive, but the grey eyes begged for understanding. How well did you know my father, back in the day?"
"Not well at all,"
Lupin said, wondering where this was going.
"I knew of him. Everyone knew of Lucius Malfoy."
"You know he sat on the board of the Daily Prophet," Draco said, and Lupin nodded. "He was also wholly responsible for the running of certain smaller magazines. The Malfoy Park Banner, of course, and the Hogsmeade Gazette." Lupin simply looked at him, curiously.
"Yes, and?"
"And after Peter Pettigrew graduated from Hogwarts, it was one of the few places to offer him a job."
"Right," said Lupin slowly. "He was a reporter for a while."
"And that put him in my father's pocket, although he didn't know it at the beginning, apparently. I'm fussy on the exact details, but at some point certain sensitive papers were discovered in Pettigrew's desk," Draco continued. "Papers that tied Pettigrew into the illegal exportation of dragon's blood. You know the penalty for that, especially in those times. He would have gone to Azkaban for life without trial, or gotten the Dementor's kiss immediately."
"Yes," said Lupin. "I know."
"My father blackmailed Pettigrew into turning informant against his friends. He drew him into the Death Eaters. My father was the one who was responsible for the plot against the Potters. The Secret Keeper idea. He turned Harry's parents in to Voldemort, and went with him that night to Godric's Hollow. He was there when they died," Draco finished, and slumped back against the wall, as if this recitation had exhausted him. Lupin held himself silent for a long while, thinking. None of this was that surprising. Certainly it was nothing he would have put past Lucius Malfoy, who, it had always seemed to him, sat at Voldemort's right hand. However, In the context of Harry's new relationship with Draco and all things Malfoy, it was disturbing indeed. "And you haven't told Harry?" Draco shook his head. "No. Dumbledore only told me yesterday, and since then, there hasn't been an opportunity, really." Lupin knew this to be only half true. "You're afraid he'll react badly." "Wouldn't you react badly?" "Harry knows his parents are dead," Lupin said bluntly. "For a child to grow up knowing his parents are not just dead, but were murdered. He's already had the worst of it, don't you think?" Draco seemed to consider this. "He's very angry," he said, "especially now. I don't know how to explain it, but I can feel it. When he was younger, Voldemort always came after him, looked for him, but now, if he could, I think he'd go after him on his own. It's that kind of anger." "And you don't want to make him angrier? Or are you worried he'll focus his anger on you? Because he won't, Draco. He knows you aren't responsible for the things your father did." "Maybe not, but it seems a little stiff to ask him to come and live in a house owned by his parents' murderer," said Draco with a bleak sharpness, and Lupin stared at him. "But your father's dead," he said. "That house has passed to you. You own it. If you choose, you can rip it down brick by brick." A shadow passed across Draco's face. "Right," he said, "because my father is dead." Lupin didn't quite know how to respond to this. Draco seemed to have shut himself off, his brief confiding mood having passed. "If there's anything I can do—" "It's all right," said Draco. "There's nothing you can do." After leaving Lupin's office, Draco felt strangely cold. He knew he should try to find Harry and the others, but at the moment all he wanted was a hot bath. He turned his steps towards the prefect's bathroom, and when he had finished bathing, walked back to his own bedroom in the dungeons. He wasn't in any great hurry, feeling warmer than earlier, and the pleasantly sleepy after-effect of a meditative soak in the bath. He shivered in the cold air of the unheated dungeons, and turned the last corner on the way to his room, with a feeling of relief. Relief which faded quickly as he saw that the hallway in front of his room was not deserted. A cloaked figure stood there, hood pulled up, almost, but not quite, melting into the shadows of the early afternoon light. Draco paused as the figure raised two slender hands and pushed the hood back. A cascade of brown curls tumbled out, framing a white face. Hermione. Draco gaped at her, all clever commentary flying out the window. "What are you doing here? Someone might see you." She looked at him blankly, as if he were speaking another language. "I think you should let me into the room now," she said, her voice distant and very calm. He looked at her more closely. "Does Harry know you're here?" Her reaction to this question was unprecedented. She flinched violently, and her eyes filled with tears. Shocked, he reached out for her, then thought better of it, and unlocked the door instead. He pushed the door open and ushered her into the room. With a last look up and down the corridor, he followed her in and shut the door behind them. Throwing his towel over the back of a chair, he studied her. She had taken a few steps forward and now stood very still in the center of the room, between the bed and the fireplace, her hands at her sides. He felt vaguely relieved that he was generally a neat person. The room was extremely tidy, his fencing clothes tossed across the back of an armchair, the only sign of mess. Then again, she didn't seem as if she would have noticed if he'd been collecting garbage on the floor since the start of term. She stared around her like someone in a distracted dream. Draco shifted his feet, wondering what to say, which rarely happened. He was also increasingly aware that he was wearing damp clothes which were sticking to him. "Hermione," he said slowly. "Would you mind telling me what this is about?" She turned slowly and looked at him. Her face, above the collar of her cloak, was very pale, her eyes like huge black coins. "Your room is very nice," she said. "You never said you had such a nice room."
"Hermione," he said more sharply.
"The rooms are built into the cliff, aren't they? That's so—"
Without thinking about it, Draco crossed the room and caught her by the wrist. She looked away from him, her eyes wide and blank. A sudden, horrible thought assailed him, and he tightened his grip on her wrist involuntarily. "Hermione, did something happen to Harry? Is he all right?"
"I don't know,"
she said, meeting his eyes finally.
"Draco, do I seem mad to you?"
"Do you seem what?"
"Do I seem like I've gone mad?"
Her breath was coming quickly now, in ragged gasps. He opened his mouth to say her name again, then realized it was becoming repetitive. Instead, he took her by the shoulders and propelled her towards the bed. She sat down obediently on the edge of it and folded her hands in her lap. He stared at her, and she stared back. "I need to change my clothes," he said. "Sit right here and don't turn around." She nodded dully. Any fears he might have had that she would be tempted to sneak a peek were relieved by her expression. She looked about as interested as if he had just told her he was about to go work on a very dull arithmancy problem backwards in Bulgarian. Feeling as if he had wandered into a very strange dream, Draco went to his clothes chest, pulled out a pair of black trousers and a dark green shirt. Then he crossed to the other side of the room and changed hurriedly, watching Hermione all the while. She did not move from her place on the bed, only sat where she was, staring down at her hands. He pulled his shirt on, buttoned it, went back to the bed, and sat down next to her. "Okay," he said quietly. "Why don't you tell me what happened?" She didn't reply for a moment, only stared past him, at a point beyond his left shoulder. "I must be mad," she said again. "It's the only explanation." He reached out and took hold of her shoulders, gripping them tightly. "Hermione," he said firmly, "I assume you came here because you wanted my help, but if you don't tell me anything, I cannot help you."
"I know,"
she said, very softly, not raising her eyes to his.
"But how can I tell you what happened when I don't understand it myself?"
He was silent for a moment. When he spoke, it was very steadily. "You have always been the sanest person I know," he said. "If you're mad, then we all are. I am, Harry is, Weasley is." Her shoulders jerked violently under his hands, and he ducked his head to try to see her face. "Weasley? This has something to do with Ron?" She gave a tiny nod. "Tell me," he said, "not what you think happened, or what you think might be wrong with you. Tell me the facts." She took a deep, ragged breath and raised her eyes slowly. They were so dark, the pupils seemed to have disappeared into the iris, like black tunnels going on and on forever.
"You won't believe me,"
she said, her voice cracking in pain.
"Harry didn't believe me, and you won't either. Ginny will believe Ron because he's her brother, and—"
"I'll believe you," he said sharply, cutting her off. "I believe you already. Just tell me what happened."
"All right,"
she nodded, and looked down again at her hands, balled into fists on top of her knees.
"All right,"
she said again, and then she began to speak, haltingly at first, then in a rush of words like a river undammed, telling him what had happened in the Gryffindor common room. And as she spoke, her small, steady voice going on and on, Draco found himself unable to believe what he was hearing. Then he remembered his earlier suspicions about Weasley,
and it all made sense now. Draco took a deep breath, knowing his next words must be chosen with great care. "Hermione," he said, "there is nothing wrong with you. I knew Weasley was harboring some sort of feelings for you. I just didn't realize he was quite this delusional about it." Her head snapped up, and she looked at him almost accusingly. "How do you know he's delusional? How do you know that I'm not the delusional one?" "Because he's the one telling the bizarre story, Hermione, not you." "You didn't see him," she said, her voice rising. "He was so sure, Draco. And the way he looked at me, how could he be lying?"
"Just because he believes it's true doesn't make it true," Draco said firmly. "He could be under a confundus curse, or a memory charm, or just be a complete nutter, which is highly likely." He broke off because Hermione was staring at him. Her eyes were enormous.
"You believe me?" she said, and clutched even harder at something she had balled tightly in her fist. "You really believe me?"
"Yes," he replied. "I absolutely believe you."
"Thank God," she said, and burst into tears, the thing in her hand dropping to the floor. Draco glanced down and blinked at the familiar glimmer of gold that was revealed. It was the gold watch that Harry always wore on his right wrist. His gold watch with the dark leather band. "He threw it at me," she said, sobbing in a way he would not have thought possible. "And then Harry said he never wanted to see or speak to me again. And I should never go near him again." He stared at her in alarm, but before he could do anything, she had thrown her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. Very gingerly, he put his own arms around her and held her as she wept. He felt sure that there were things one did in these situations, soothing noises to be made, heads to be patted, but he had no experience comforting people, much less comforting anyone he cared about. He could do nothing more than sit and hold her as the tumult of her grief spent itself. "I feel like I can't breathe," he heard her whisper finally, her voice muffled against his shoulder. She still had her arms around him, her hands fisted into the back of his shirt. All her softness was pressed against him, and he could almost taste the salt of her tears in his mouth. "I have to get back to Gryffindor Tower," she said, and tried in vain to wipe away her tears. "Are you sure that's a good—" "I have to see Harry." Her voice was tense and desperate. "I want him to put the Veritas curse on me. Then he'll have to believe me." "Hermione, there's no other way!" He reached out for her, but she jumped off the bed and began pacing up and down the room. After a moment, she spun and faced him, looking determined. "Come with me," she said. Draco fought down his misgivings. "All right, but I'm not going to let Harry put any curse on you." "Fine," she said quietly. "At least if you're with me, he'll have to believe me." He slid off the bed, landed lightly on his feet, and almost passed out. The blood roared in his ears as loudly as thunder, and black diamonds of darkness danced in front of his eyes. He grabbed the bedpost to steady himself. Hermione was at his side in an instant, her hands on his arm. "Draco, are you all right?" He nodded as his vision slowly cleared. "I'm fine." "I'm sorry," she said softly. Her dark eyes were fixed on his face, full of concern. "I haven't forgotten about what you asked me the other day, about your shoulder. I've been looking in the library." "I said I was all right," he said, then bent down again, this time carefully, and grabbed for his boots, which were under the bed. She watched him while he laced them up, biting her lip and looking anxious. It was exactly the way she usually looked at Harry, he thought, concerned and protective. He didn't like it, didn't want to feel worried about. He stood up and grabbed for his cloak, which had been flung across a chair back. "Let's go." The prefect's meeting room was freezing cold. Ron felt sure his fingers were turning blue, but when he looked down at them, they were the same color they had always been. Had he been able to take himself to Madame Pomfrey, she could have told him that shock drops body temperature. But he didn't want to see anyone. He wanted to sit in this room forever. He wanted to die. Over and over he kept replaying the scene in the common room in his head. What he had said, what Harry had said, the look on his face. He'd known it would be bad, but not that bad. Hermione had told him so many times, here in this very room, that she was quite sure that Harry didn't love her anymore, that she suspected he knew that she no longer loved him either. And he'd believed her. Why shouldn't he believe her? Hermione had never lied to him. Only apparently she had. A spasm of nausea twisted his stomach as he recollected her words in the common room. "I do not love you," she had said, "and moreover, I have no idea what you're talking about." So she had lied. Apparently, she had never had any intention of telling Harry. Not at Christmas, not ever. Looking back now, he could see how she had put him off and put him off. He'd been too blinded to see it at the time. The sickness came back in a wave. This time, he was able to breathe through it. It was difficult, but he managed it by concentrating. In fact, he was concentrating so hard that he did not hear the door of the meeting room open quietly, and it was only when he looked up again that he saw that she had come into the room and was looking at him with an expression of great alarm. "Ron?" she said gently. "What's wrong? You look ill." He got to his feet and stared at her, and Hermione stared back. She looked the same. The faint scarlet light from the glass window teased the gold-red glints in her tumbled hair, which she wore down because he told her he liked it that way. "What are you doing here?" he said, and his voice came out creaky and unfamiliar. Her lips parted, and she looked at him in surprise. "I know I've been distracted lately," she said. "But please don't be angry. You know it isn't easy for me to get away." She took a step towards him, and when he did not move, she took another. "I have to leave soon," she said, and put her arms around him, and he let her, unresisting. Let's waste our time being angry." He looked down into her face, her familiar, beautiful face, and remembered the first time she had kissed him, and had marveled at how she'd been able to behave in public as if nothing were wrong, or strange, or different. She'd told him she was terrified of hurting Harry. He wasn't the same Harry anymore. He might even be dangerous. His thoughts, his memories, broke up into whirling fragments and spun around his head like startled birds. He clutched at her, heard his own voice as if it came from a distance. "Why did you lie to him?" he asked. "Lie to who?" she returned, her voice sounding suddenly sharp, startled. "To Harry," he said. "Why did you lie to Harry?" "We both lie to Harry," she replied defensively, "all the time. We have to. But I told you, Christmas." Without any conscious recognition that he was doing so, he seized her shoulders and shook her, hard, and heard her gasp in response. "Christmas? What's the point of bloody Christmas when Harry knows already?" She froze in his grasp. "Harry knows?" she echoed, her voice utterly shocked. He stared at her. All the whirling thoughts in his head came together like glass fragments under the Reparo spell. everything seemed suddenly very obvious and very clear. He tightened his grip on her shoulders, and she gasped in pain, but he hardly noticed. When he spoke, he marveled at the evenness of his own voice, its firmness and deliberation. "Who are you?" he said. She tried to pull away. "Ron, let me go." "Who are you?" he said again. "And why have you been pretending to be Hermione?" Even though it was only afternoon, the corridor was deserted. The torchlight in the hallways fighting for brilliance with the sun outside. As they continued to walk, Draco grimly smiled to himself at how they must look. The Slytherin prefect and the Gryffindor prefect, sneaking along the corridors like a guilty couple. Although in that case, he imagined, Hermione probably would have been clinging to his arm. Instead, she walked a little apart, lost in thought. As they turned a corner, she paused. "Draco, wait." He stopped and turned. "What is it?" Hermione was biting her lip. "The prefect's meeting room." She turned and pointed. "We just passed it, and I thought I heard a noise." "All right, let's check it out." As he passed Hermione, she caught at his sleeve, and they walked the rest of the way to the meeting room door. Now we look like a guilty couple, Draco thought, and shoved the thought back. The meeting room door was closed, but a faint bar of light lay across the bottom. That in itself meant nothing, but it was enough to make Draco turn back to Hermione. She was staring at him with huge eyes, and jerked her chin towards the door. He sighed and put a hand on the knob. "Iliuranus Filialathes," he said, and the doorknob turned under his fingers. He pushed, and the door swung open. The light inside was dazzling, and it took a moment for Draco to focus his eyes on the scene before him. When he did, he stared. Ron was standing by the table, his red hair wildly rumpled around his head, and he was leaning forward, his hands on the shoulders of a girl. It took a moment for Draco to realize that he was not touching her affectionately, but instead holding her tightly in place. She was wearing a black cloak, under which a plain uniform could be seen poking out from the dark fabric. Even without seeing her face, Draco knew immediately who she was. He was not at all surprised when she whipped her head around at the sound of the opening door, and he saw her wide, dark eyes, the familiar line of her nose, the curved bow mouth. It was Hermione. She gasped once, and Ron spun around, his eyes huge in his white face, as he stared at the real Hermione, who gaped back at him. The moment hung suspended between all of them, and then, released from the grip of Ron's hands, the girl tore her sleeve out of his grasp and raced for the door. She avoided Draco, but slammed straight into Hermione, knocking her down. This barely slowed the girl's forward progress. She stumbled, righted herself, and flew down the corridor, vanishing around the corner so quickly she almost skidded and fell. Ron immediately flung himself after her, but Draco was too quick for him. He grabbed Ron by the arm and barked at Hermione. "Go! Go!" She didn't need to be told twice. She sprang to her feet and bolted after the girl, dragging her wand out of her sleeve as she ran. Ron tried to pull away, but Draco spun him against the wall so hard that the breath was knocked out of him. He gasped, and his knees buckled. Draco caught him with an iron grip on his upper arms and held him fast. "Who is she?" he hissed, and shook Ron hard. Ron regarded him blindly, as if he wasn't there, as if the grip on his arms didn't hurt. "I don't know," he said woodenly. "That's what I was trying to find out." Draco stared at him, taking in the blank, stunned expression on Ron's face. "So, you don't even know who you've been shagging, do you? She could have been anyone. Anything!" "Don't," Ron said, but his tone was hopeless, as if he didn't expect mercy, and wouldn't have thought he deserved it if it were offered. Draco leaned his face in close to Ron's and spoke in his ear, his tone conversational. "You know, there are 2 simple rules of friendship, Weasley, and you've broken both of them. The first one is, you don't screw your best friend's girlfriend. The second one is, you don't screw your best friend's girlfriend." He grinned without amusement. "I realize that's only one rule, but since you apparently failed to catch it on the first go-round, I thought it was worth restating." Ron dragged his eyes back to Draco's face and looked at him with dull loathing. "I don't see what it's got to do with you, Malfoy." "It has everything to do with me." "Why? You hated me before. Now you get to hate me with Harry for company. Aren't you glad?" "If you're waiting for me to thank you for living down to my expectations of you, you'll be waiting a long time," said Draco shortly. "Even I expected better of you than that." "You would have done it," said Ron, his voice flat. Draco's muscles stiffened. "Done what?" "Same thing," Ron said. "If she'd wanted you." It was a moment before Draco could speak. When he did, his tone was sharp and cold as an icicle. "Snap out of the dream state, Weasley," he said. "She never wanted you." Ron laughed without mirth. "But you're not denying it," he said, "are you?" Draco slammed Ron against the wall, hard. "One more smart word out of you," he snarled, "and 5 minutes with me will let you know exactly how I feel." "Let him go." It was Hermione's voice. Draco turned and saw her standing in the doorway. She was very pale, but seemed composed, clutching her robes tightly around her, as if she were cold. Draco immediately wondered just how long she'd been standing there. "He doesn't know anything." "How do you know that?" Draco asked, and gave her a hard look, but it seemed to be the real Hermione, not the imposter. "Because I do," she said tiredly. Her eyes glanced over to Ron, who looked quickly away. "We need to go talk to Harry now. That's what's important." "And the girl?" Hermione shook her head. "She got away. Ran too fast for me to catch her. Then she turned a corner and just disappeared. If I didn't know better, I'd think she had an invisibility cloak." "Wonderful," said Draco, and released his grip on Ron and stepped back. He looked the other boy up and down once, as if taking his measure. Then he smiled. "You saved my life," he said, "and because of that, I won't hurt you. But if you come near me again, if you come near Harry again—" "Draco," Hermione said from the doorway, "please don't." She held her cloak even more tightly around herself. "We need to go." Ron drooped against the wall and kept his eyes on his shoes as Hermione and Draco walked out of the room. Harry lay flat on his back, staring up into the shadows. He wasn't exactly sure how long he'd been lying here in the fencing room, but here he was. The events of the day were fuzzy in his mind, after the point where Hermione had rushed out of the common room, holding the watch he had thrown at her. He remembered turning back to Ron, who'd look white and sick and on the very edge of throwing up. Neither of them had said anything, and a moment later he found himself also tearing through the portrait hole and down to this very room. And here he was, staring up into the flat darkness overhead, listening to his own breathing, feeling the beat of his own heart, and wondering how his body could keep going even though all the feeling had seemed to stop. Inside him was a lion on a chain, and if he had let it free, it would bring the castle down around his ears. Some fierce inner part of him took pleasure in the image, his magid powers gone wild, the windows shattering, the walls shaking apart. But most of him was just grateful for the icy control that seemed to have settled over him like the jaws of a trap slamming shut. He did not know where it had come from. Draco, he suspected, but he was grateful for it. A soft click made him jump. He rolled onto his side and saw with astonishment that the door was being opened, and he blinked as faint light flooded the darkness, and saw the blurred shape of two people as they came into the room. The glint of light as fair hair caught the faint light from the high windows. "Draco." "Malfoy," he whispered. "What the—" "Thought I'd find you here," Draco said, sounding grimly determined. "We need to talk to you." Harry felt for the glasses he had deposited on the floor beside him and slipped them on. Instantly the world sprang into focus, and he saw Draco standing above him, his expression set and grim, and behind him was Hermione. She had her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold, and her hair tumbled forward, almost hiding her expression. Harry heard his own voice as if it came from a distance. "I won't talk to you with her here," he said. Draco looked exasperated. "Potter—" "You heard what I said," he muttered. Draco opened his mouth to reply, but before he could say anything, Hermione interrupted. "Fine," she said, her voice slightly shrill with tension. "If that's the only way to get you to listen, Harry, I'll go." "Hermione," Draco began, but she was gone, having turned away quickly, and Harry heard the soft sound of her footsteps as she walked quietly away to the other side of the room. Harry winced, feeling as if something sharp had been driven into his heart. "Idiot," said Draco in exasperation. "What did you have to do that for?" "You wouldn't understand," said Harry in a fierce whisper. "Anyway, I don't want to talk about it." "Too bad." Draco's voice was flat. "Because there's something you need to hear. Just leave me alone." Draco looked utterly exasperated. "Okay, fine. You asked for this." He took a deep breath. "Ron is not now, and never has been, sleeping with Hermione." A stunned silence. Harry stayed where he was, lying on the dusty floor, frozen. The next words he spoke tumbled out of his mouth, without him even thinking about them. "How—" he began, and paused. Something seemed to have caught in his throat. "How do you know they aren't? That it's not true?" Draco sighed and looked down at Harry. "I know because I saw it for myself, all right. I saw Ron with a girl he thought was Hermione. And do you want to know why I know it wasn't Hermione? Because the real Hermione was standing right next to me. You honestly think she'd ever do that to you?" he demanded. "You honestly think she'd even want to?" Harry looked at him, but he was hearing Ron's voice in his head. "I'm in love with Hermione, and she's in love with me." "And you're sure?" "Of course I'm sure! I'm absolutely, utterly sure. Ron's been shagging someone, but it isn't, and never was, Hermione. Someone's been playing a bloody trick on all of you." Harry sat up, but said nothing. Looking down at his hands, he wondered when he had started biting his nails again. He curled his fingers protectively against his palms. "What about Ron?" he said. There was a long silence. When Draco spoke finally, it was in a low voice. "I'm sorry about that, Harry." Harry noted vaguely the use of his given name. He supposed it ought to make him feel more kindly towards Draco. It didn't. Rage was beginning to crash against the inside of his head, in rhythmic waves like the ocean crashing against the shore. "I bet all of this makes you glad," he said in a half-whisper. "You've always hated Ron. You think he's beneath you. You always have. And maybe if I hadn't let you treat him like that, he wouldn't have felt like I wasn't his friend anymore. Like I picked you over him. Whatever that potion did to us, it was forced on me. I never wanted this." His voice broke on a half-shout and cracked, although he was not crying. He felt a bleak triumph. He had been hurt, terribly, and wanted to hurt someone back. Judging from the way Draco had flinched away from him, he was succeeding in doing just that. Draco's eyes were huge in his face, huge and startled. Harry fell silent, the feeling of satisfaction vanishing instantly. "Malfoy, but Draco was backing away from Harry now. "Fuck you then, Potter," he said, his voice a serrated dagger of ice. "You want me to leave you alone? Consider yourself left. Stay here and rot for all I care. Ruin everyone's life. Ruin your own." He broke off as he couldn't stand to look at Harry anymore, spun around on his heel, and stalked to the door and out of it, slamming it hard behind him. For a moment there was silence, and Harry looked over at Hermione, who stared at him with cold eyes, before she too left the room without a word. Draco ran down the front steps of the castle and out onto the snowy path without looking where he was going. He shivered, but did not stop walking. Throwing his head back, he stared up at the sky. It arced above in a steel-colored shriek, raining shards of light down onto the snow. For the first time in days, there were clouds, heavy as blocks, that seemed about to collide with each other. He wondered if that meant it was going to snow again soon. He had reached the bottom of the path, where the Quidditch pitch was, and veered off sharply towards the right, alongside the forbidden forest. Some part of him knew he was following a route that Rhysand had set for him, that he had often followed to meet her, but didn't think about why he was going this way. He wanted to be alone. He wanted to be far from the castle. He was at the low wall now that ran perpendicular to the forest's border, and leapt over it, landing on the other side as silent as a cat in the deep snow. His boots sank up to the ankles as he took a few steps forward into the clearing, and paused. He stood there for a moment, gasping in lungfuls of icy air. The iron control that had been drilled into him since he was a child was snapping with rage and breaking free. He could tear down the trees with the force of his anger, crack the world in half. But, of course, he did none of those things. Instead, like a petulant child, he flung himself face down in the snow and buried his head in his arms. The cold bit into him instantly, the snow freezing under his body, his bare hands. He ignored it. "Draco," said a voice in his ear, "what are you doing?" He knew that voice, and supposed he should not be surprised that she was here, but he burrowed his head further into his arms anyway, willing her to go away. She didn't. "Poor baby boy," she said, her voice lilting with amusement. "Did you fall out of a tree?" Her breath tickled the back of his neck, and Draco sighed and rolled over on his back. Rhysand was kneeling above him, her hair tumbling down like a tent of black silk around them both, her shoulders bare and white under the moonlight. She smiled. "Get up," she said, and stood in a rustle of silk, and he got to his feet as well, mostly because he didn't want her standing over him. She was dressed in black. Her feet, where the dress ended, were bare on the snow, and where she walked, they left no marks behind them. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I heard you crying out for me, and came as soon as I could." He blinked at her and took a step back. "So you came to help me?" She lowered her eyes. "Of course I did." "Good. Then you can take a message from me back to my father," he said. She laughed. "I do not take messages back." "You'll take this one," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him sharply. "Tell Voldemort, and my father too, that I know that they had something to do with what is happening in the castle, and when I find out why and how, they will regret what they have done." He paused. "I will make them pay for it." Rhysand smiled her cool little smile. "Is there anything more to that speech?" she asked. "You could add a bit about drowning them in their own blood, or some stuff about torture. Up to you, of course." Draco's voice was clipped. "No, I think it's fine as is, thanks." "It's just a long list of unspecific threats.
said Rhys, sounding disappointed. "A very boring message, if you want my opinion." "That's the last thing I would ever ask you for," said Draco pleasantly. "Well, your father won't like it." "That's fine. I don't like him." "Not very disagreeable today," she snapped. "I've had a hard day," Draco said tightly. She smiled slyly and shook her hair back. "You are foolish to spurn what comfort I could offer you." He looked at her then, as calculatingly as he could, and she looked back at him out of her oddly shaped grey eyes that were so like his own. "You offer me nothing," he said. "But while we're on the subject, what were you trying to offer Harry back in the graveyard?" She shrugged. "What do you think?" "You rarely get off on a 17-year-old virgin with skinny chicken legs? I somehow doubt that." Rhys burst out laughing and sat down gracefully in the snow. "Harry's a virgin," she said. "Oh, that's priceless. That little girlfriend of his must not be much use," she said, and there was cool contempt in her voice that shot a bolt of ice up his spine. "Leave her out of this," he said, his tone clipped. "As a matter of fact, leave them both out of this. Stay away from Harry from now on." "But I like him." "No, you don't. You just want something from him. Well, too bad. He's been through enough." "Oh, I don't know," she said, tilting her head back. "I think you underestimate him. All that untapped power. It's attractive. He's very appealing on his own merits." "That's great," Draco said. "I meant what I said. Stay away from him." "You're fond of him." "And what if I am?" he said, sounding suddenly weary. "Have you never had a human emotion? Or was it just so long ago that you forgot?" An odd flicker came and went behind her eyes, and for a moment she looked almost angry. Then her expression smoothed itself out into a mocking half-smile. "I would have thought Lucius would have told you that it's hardly good manners to mention a lady's age like that," she said. "Ladies, sure," said Draco, finally fed up, "but I don't remember him saying anything about demon bitches from hell." She leapt to her feet, her eyes flashing. "How dare you?" she said, but he stood his ground as she towered above him, eyes flashing, her hair whipped by an invisible wind. "Stupid child," she said, and her face had taken on the narrow, predatory look of Avila's. "I am not a child," he said hotly. "Yes, you are," she said, "so painfully young and sad." She took her face between her long and narrow hands, and he did not move away, could not move away. "Are you cold?" she whispered, and her breath stirred the hair at his temples. "Do you wake up freezing from nightmares? Does your breath come short? Does your vision begin to blur? My sick and beautiful angel boy," she said, and her voice was like liquid silver. "Too pretty to go mad and die of it. But it is long past stopping now." "What is?" Draco said, and heard the note of panic in his own voice. "What is long past stopping?" She took her hands from his face and stepped back from him. "If you cannot guess, you will know soon enough," she said, and smiled. "What is wrong with me?" he wanted to ask her. "How ill am I?" But he knew that if he did, she would respond teasingly. So instead, he turned and took a few steps away from her. "Please leave him alone," he said finally, without looking back at her. "Leave us alone." He waited, but she did not reply. When he finally turned, she was gone, as he knew she would be. The snow underfoot showed no marks at all where she had walked. "Mundungus," he said, and the portrait door opened. Draco paused a moment to admire the irony of the fact that he now knew the Gryffindor password.
Years ago, he would have paid good galleons to know it. Now it seemed trivial. He stepped into the common room, and the portrait swung shut behind him. The room was not empty. Someone was sitting in one of the overstuffed armchairs, reading a book. He knew immediately it was Ginny, even before she turned around, knew from the flaming red hair that was currently screwed into a top knot at the back of her head. "Draco?" she said in surprise when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" "Came to see Hermione," he replied. "I assume she's here now?" Ginny gave him an extremely confused look. "She is, but I don't know if she wants to talk to anyone." Draco looked at her narrowly. "Meaning?" "Meaning Harry tried to go talk to her about half an hour ago, and she slammed the door in his face," Ginny said, looking even more bewildered. "Good for her," Draco said shortly. "Best thing for him." Now Ginny looked taken aback. "What do you mean?" Draco frowned at her and stalked over to the fireplace. There was a poker lying beside the grate. He bent, picked it up, and began prodding moodily at the glowing coals with the pointed end. "Harry needs to grow up," he said. "He's acted like a complete arse, and he might as well know it. The only thing that might do him the blindest bit of good at this point would be if she kicked him down the front staircase and he bounced down every single step." There was a short silence. "What's going on?" she asked after a moment. "Why is Hermione angry at Harry? Did you two have some sort of fight?" "You could say that," Draco said. "He accused me of despising his best friend and basically causing the current state of affairs, which I apparently did by being a selfish, overbearing, snobbish, and despicable bastard with no redeemable qualities whatsoever." Ginny pushed a lock of red hair back from her eyes and sighed. "Thanks for the vague rundown of events," she said. "That still doesn't explain what's happening." For a moment, Draco just looked at her. Then he sighed and began to tell her the events of the day. When he was finally finished, Ginny stayed where she was, rooted to the spot, staring at him with awful amazement. "I can't believe this," she said, and stood up suddenly. "I have to go find him." Draco's eyes widened. "Find who? Harry?" "No, Ron." "Ginny, it might not be the best thing right now for you to get involved." "Involved?" she replied, shocked. "Draco, he's my brother." "I know that, but—" "Look, if it makes you feel any better, I saw him earlier." "How did he seem? Was he all right?" "All right? No," he said, and then at her expression, amended himself. "He looked devastated, but physically, yes, he was fine. Mostly because I refrained from bashing his head in." She looked startled, then resigned. He didn't blame her. "So, what are you going to do then?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Draco said. "I could get unbelievably pissed on Archland wine and sleep until the middle of next week. Maybe when I wake up, the boy who lived will have sorted out his hellishly complex love life without my assistance." "Or you could go look for Harry," she said. "He's blocked me. I can't reach him at all." Ginny shook her head. "You can find him," she said. "Not everyone has telepathy to rely on, you know. Sometimes all you have is how well you know the other person, and you know him better than anyone." He felt something loosen in his chest at her words. She was right. As a matter of fact, he had a fairly good idea exactly where Harry would have gone. "I wouldn't know what to say to him." "You'll think of something," Ginny said. "I have faith in you." He almost laughed. "Well, that sets you apart from the masses, doesn't it?" he said. "Maybe," she said. "Don't tell anyone." "Any other dark secrets I should know about?" She looked thoughtful. "Well, I can eat an entire ice cream sundae without using my hands." "Really?" Draco asked. The side of her mouth curled up. "Really? Now get out of here before someone sees you." He nodded. "Okay. And thanks." Ginny smiled at him, a little sadly, and watched him disappear back through the portrait hole. By the time Draco found the room again, through some amount of trial and error, night was beginning to fall. The day seemed to have passed like a wheel turning, and in his exhaustion, the corridor walls and even the floor beneath his feet seemed to shimmer in the pale grey light. In this place, not that far from the main staircase, was a room filled with old furniture and dusty, unused books. And on the wall, a mirror framed in tarnished gold, a mirror he had never looked into. "I show you not your face, but your heart's desire." He had been there once and walked out. It was not a place that figured happily in his memories. But for Harry, it would be different. That he knew. Standing by the lake, drenched in rain that afternoon, he had felt what Harry was feeling, as if it were water pouring through a sluice gate that could not be closed. Harry's happiness had layered itself over his own emotions until he was no longer sure exactly what he was feeling. He had put his hands over his ears and slid down the trunk of the tree, waiting for it to be over. He was not used to feeling things with such intensity, such happiness. It was like bleeding to death. He remembered the door now, the corridor outside. It had been wide open that day. Now it was open only a crack. He put a hand on it, pushed it wide, and stepped into the room. The pale evening light drowned the walls in silver. The furniture, shrouded in white coverings, looked like icebergs looming up out of the grayish darkness as Draco navigated his way across the room. Through the bay window in the east wall, he could see the world outside. Gray sky, white snow, the slender, penciled shapes of winter trees. And on the window ledge sat Harry. He had his legs drawn up, his hands clasped loosely across his knees. He was looking out the window, and the faint light chased the planes of his face with silver. As Draco approached, Harry turned and looked at him. He seemed unsurprised to see him there. Or if he was, Draco couldn't tell. Harry's face was a mask. The two boys looked at each other across the dark space that separated them, as if they faced each other across a Quidditch pitch. Had the mirror on the wall been a true mirror, it would have cast back a curious reflection, some odd tableau of perfect opposites. No living soul could have failed to notice it, but there were no other souls in the room, and Harry and Draco could not see themselves. "I thought you'd come," Harry said. Draco hesitated, then said, "Well, you were right." "I see that," Harry said. "How did you find me?" Draco glanced around the shattered room and back at Harry. "I just thought you'd come here." Harry looked down at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was rapid. "I'm sorry for what I said. All of it. I hate everyone right now." Feeling suddenly exhausted, Draco leaned against one of the sheeted pieces of furniture. He suspected from its shape that it was a chair. "I know," he said. "It's okay." "It's not okay." Harry took a ragged breath. "I've got no reason to hate you. You were just trying to help, but I wanted to hurt you." "Does that mean you believe me now?" Draco asked and straightened up. Harry nodded, ever so slightly. "I believe you now," he said, and Draco almost jumped at the unexpected contact. "Some part of me believed you then, but I didn't want to admit it." He unclasped his hands from around his knees and swung to face Draco, dangling his legs over the side of the windowsill. "She hates me now, and not without good reason. I was horrible to her. I wouldn't forgive me either." "She'll forgive you," Draco replied. "How could she? And why would Ron—" Harry raised his eyes to Draco's. "I have my guesses," Draco replied, filling in the unasked question. "Do I understand why Weasley did what he did?" "Yeah, I think I do."
I also think I'm not the best person to explain it to you. Harry's mouth tensed. Why not? Because I hate him for what he did, Draco said flatly. And a big part of me wants you to hate him too. But my reasons for that are selfish, and I know that. There was a short silence, and then Harry, apparently having decided that pressing Draco on this point would be a bad idea, nodded again and scooted sideways on the windowsill. Draco accepted the unspoken invitation and went to sit beside Harry. They were silent while Draco waited for Harry to reach some sort of conclusion. He sat where he was, as the sky outside the window darkened further, the clouds parting to reveal the silvery grey moon, which began to spill into the room, turning the mirror on the far wall into gleaming sequins. I tried to talk to Hermione, Harry said after a moment, but she slammed the door in my face. Well, to be fair, you were a total git today, Draco said. Then what's your advice? Why are you asking me? I'm not the one with the girlfriend. But you do have a girlfriend, Harry said. Oh, right, said Draco, and hopped down off the windowsill. Look, you can always try again tomorrow before we leave for the manor, and if she still slams the door on you, I'll talk to her. Thanks, Harry said, a little stiffly. Draco could tell that Harry loathed the thought that he could talk to Hermione, but was biting it back, which Draco appreciated. I have to try and get some sleep tonight, Draco said, feeling his exhaustion through the marrow of his bones. Will you be all right? I'll be all right, Harry said. Draco was halfway to the door when Harry spoke again. Draco. He turned around instantly. Yes? Who do you think she is? Draco knew immediately what he meant. I don't know, he answered honestly. But do you have guesses? Draco nodded slightly. Who hates me that much to plan something like that? Harry said, and his voice was a little wistful. If it's any consolation, Potter, said Draco as gently as he could, by my calculations, it didn't have anything to do with hating you. It was midnight, and the Slytherin common room was deserted. He had been pacing the length of the floor for some time now. Something in Draco's chest was twisting savagely. He felt angry, not at anyone in particular, but at life in general. Everything seemed to be falling apart around him in huge, shattering chunks. And for a change, the mass destruction was due to nothing he'd done. Bloody Weasley, he muttered to himself, then paused. Right, he said, better do it now. And he turned and went along the hallway to the other side of the dungeons, where the girls' rooms were. The door to the room was closed, not surprisingly, since it was midnight after all. Draco raised his hand and rapped sharply on the door. He heard the sound of swift feet, and the door opened. It was Blaise. Her red hair was down, tumbling around her shoulders. Her face bare of makeup, but her glittery barrettes were in place. She wore a long, pale green dressing gown, printed with an embroidered blue dragon, which curled across her shoulders and rested its head on her breast. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Draco? Hello, darling, he said, leaning against the door jamb, all dressed up for Malcolm. She looked briefly surprised, then smug. So you heard about that? Yes, I heard about that. Care to come to the common room so we can talk? She looked back into the room, where only a handful of other girls were fast asleep. Fine, she said. Let me change real quick. And she shut the door in his face. A few moments later they were both in the common room, and Blaise had changed into her school skirt and a soft cardigan. She stood with her hands on her hips and regarded him out of cool green eyes. Well, what is it you wanted to say to me? Because if it's about Malcolm, Pansy said that she saw you and Granger coming out of the prefect's meeting room the other day.
Apparently, you two were in there for some time. Why don't you start by explaining that?
If we're starting this conversation off with accusations, then I'd like to know what Pansy was doing lurking around the prefect's meeting room, Draco said.
Blaze shook her head.
You're unbelievable.
You should talk.
She threw her hands up. So I fooled around with Malcolm, she nearly yelled. I did it just to see if you care, which clearly you don't.
Draco raised an eyebrow. You started snogging that weasel-faced tosser just to see if it would annoy me? I'm touched.
But not annoyed.
Not particularly, he said.
Blaze shook her head again. I want to break up.
Oh no, Draco said in a bored, deadpan voice. Please reconsider.
Seizing a heavy candlestick from one of the tables, Blaze flung it at his head. Draco ducked, and it hit the wall and cracked. Merlin's beard, woman. Do you want to wake the whole house? He said. I hate you, Blaze snarled, but he ignored her as a thought suddenly came into his head. With a whispered spell, silver cords suddenly sprang out of the air and snapped around her wrists and ankles. She shrieked in surprise and sat down hard on the floor, struggling against the bonds. What is your problem? She hissed, her green eyes full of rage. I don't know, said Draco thoughtfully. I guess I'm just not a very nice person. Blaze shrieked out loud. I hate you, Draco Malfoy. You lying, cheating, pointy-faced bastard. I hate you. Draco put a hand over her mouth and smiled. Scream all you want, he said pleasantly, and undid the tie around his neck and proceeded to make a makeshift gag. It won't make any difference. Now, with your permission, dearest, I'm going to have a look round your personal belongings. Do sit tight while I do so, because I have a suspicion that you know what's been going on the past few months, and I won't stop until I find what I'm looking for. Blaze stared at him with eyes that could have rendered him dead if she had had the power, but Draco took no notice as he crossed the room back to the girls' dorm. Murmuring a muffliato spell, he entered and went straight to Blaze's trunk. A quick search, however, yielded nothing, the contents being mostly books, makeup, jewelry, parchments, piles of clothes, stacks of photographs, her journal, a pale green book with a butterfly-shaped lock that some obscurely motivated chivalry prevented him from opening. All in all, nothing terribly interesting. When he returned to the common room, it was to find Blaze sitting right where he had left her. She made an attractive picture, sitting there like some shibari wet dream, but he was in no mood for playing. Crouching down next to her, he removed the tie, and she glared at him out of green eyes that were the color of poison. The look on her face was one of such withering contempt that even Draco, no slouch at sneering himself, was somewhat daunted. "Are you done yet?" she asked at length, in a tone that was cold and sharp. "Mostly," he replied. "You didn't find what you were looking for?" Draco sighed. "No, but I found where you keep all your silk knickers." "How come you never wore any of those when we were fooling around?" he asked. "I didn't think you were paying enough attention to me to notice what knickers I was wearing. Too busy fantasizing about your little Gryffindor slut." Draco bit back a nasty reply. He was too tired. "I didn't really think it was you anyway," he said with soft malice, "but I had to make sure." Her lips tightened. "You didn't think what was me? What are you talking about?" He ignored her, deciding to press on. "Where are the slippers I gave you for your birthday back in October?" Her eyes widened with disbelief. "I gave them to Pansy. They had some cheap material mixed in that irritated my skin. I couldn't wear them," she snapped, looking haughty. "Why? Do you want them back?" "No, but thank you for being honest, darling," he said, and stood up, then wrapped the tie back around Blaze's mouth before she could protest. Returning to the girl's room, the spell still carefully in place, Draco maneuvered his way towards where he knew Pansy slept.
He pushed aside the hand-painted screen that separated the room to find an empty bed. But her trunk was still here, apparently undisturbed. He took a silent step forward and looked it over, considering. Then he raised his hand and whispered, "Aloha, Mora." The lock sprang open with a soft click, and he knelt down and began to rifle through the contents. The first thing he saw was books, neatly piled, and underneath them empty jars and bottles. And underneath those were a pair of pale gold silk slippers and a neatly folded set of white pajamas, springed all over with blue and yellow flowers, and next to that, a plain uniform. Draco's heart began to pound like a trip hammer. He had known, somehow, that it had been a member of his own house, but not that the proof would present itself so readily. She must have been positive that no one would guess. Quietly, he plunged his hands into the trunk, shoving the clothes aside. There were folded papers underneath. He took them and shoved them haphazardly into his cloak pockets. Under that was a long enamel box, which sprang open when he put pressure on the ends. Folded inside was a long swath of multicolored fabric, which shimmered when he touched it. "An invisibility cloak," he whispered under his breath. A smile came and twitched at the corner of his mouth. Clever pansy. He rolled the cloak into a small ball and stuffed it into his pocket, certain he was beginning to look extremely lumpy. He put his hands back into the trunk, but there was nothing else, just grit gathering under his fingernails. Then he stood up and silently went back. When he returned to the common room, Blaze was looking even more mutinous, and the first thing she said, once Draco had removed the tagad, was, "Are you stealing Pansy's things?" "No, it's evidence," he said shortly. "You're a thief," she said, "and a bastard, turning on the members of your own house for a bunch of Gryffindor scum." "Shut up, Blaze." I'll tell everyone." Draco knelt down again and looked into her eyes. "Do it," he said evenly, "and I'll tell everyone exactly why you agreed to this dating charade with me in the first place." Her breath hissed between her teeth. "You unbelievable bastard. You'd blackmail me?" "Just keeping things fair. I don't like power imbalances, unless, of course, I have the upper hand, which right now I do." "Maybe right now." Her eyes narrowed, "but not forever. Everyone knows where your loyalties really lie, Draco. Are you suggesting that I no longer have a shot at winning Most Popular Slytherin of the Year?" Her voice, when she spoke, held so much frozen scorn it could have kept a year's supply of ice mice from melting. "Lose me, and you lose the last person in this house who had any faith that you might come back to us." She snarled at him, and he was startled to see that her eyes were oddly bright, as if she might be about to cry, and he felt a spark of something like sympathy for her inside his chest. He sighed. "Then I'm on my own. Thanks for the warning, but it isn't necessary. I'm not afraid of Slytherin House." "You should be, Draco," Blaze said, and looked away from him. He fought back another sigh, feeling even more tired. "I'm going to untie you now," he said. "I want you to promise not to hit me the second your hands are free." "I promise," she said, without looking at him, and the moment her hands were free, of course, she hit him anyway. And that's all for this chapter, guys. Okay, so a few things, just for some notes and telling you guys all about it. This chapter was a little bit of a beast to edit. And the reason for that is a few things. One, God, so Cassandra Clare had made this entire detour during this chapter and others that followed. But this one specifically, in talking about the cup, that they are, looking for and trying to find out what it's all about. Hermione had discovered that it was in a museum. And there was this thing where they had gone to the museum on like a field trip, And they had stolen the cup from this wizarding museum, and then they were like, oh yeah, hell yeah, we got the cup now, let's see, Voldemort try to, get it now that it's in our possession. And it was so stupid. And, David M., who's on here, who has done the deep dives and who I have linked down for his whole deep dive into this particular series, said that he enjoyed that chapter because at least he felt like something was happening. And, I mean, I'll give him that. Like, at least something was happening because a lot of the stuff around it was sort of plotting and drawn out. But it was so stupid. I never liked the museum heist. It was annoying, and I also am not a fan of Cassandra's idiosyncrasies, where she feels this constant need to put American things into the wizarding world. Because there's no field trips at Hogwarts. Like, that is not a thing that they do, okay? Like, we would have heard about it in other books, and it's just an American concept that she's shoving in, and it doesn't make any sense. And it was just an excuse to get them off of Hogwarts grounds, to have this, like, adventure, and it was really, really dumb. And then another thing that she had done was, Harry had cast a Veritas charm on Ron in order to get him to admit all of the stuff that had gone on between him and quote-unquote Hermione. And I'm like, he can't cast a curse like that within the walls of Hogwarts. Everyone and everything would be alerted to that. It just makes more sense to, have Ron just kind of say all the stuff and Harry just straight up not believe Hermione. It just makes sense, especially for the way that Cassandra is writing him at the moment. And yeah, it was a whole thing. Just insane and crazy with all of the stuff that she was drawing out forever and always. And I'm like, this is silly. You can shorten this up so much. So yeah, this particular chapter took me a hot second to put together because there was so much that had gone on, so much I had to take out and just completely redo. Although the beats are still there, they are just slightly different. And those of you that have been with this fiction for a while will probably notice the difference. But anyway, thank you guys for listening. As always, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. And if you are interested in supporting me monetarily, I have a Patreon and a Ko-fi. Both are linked here on my About section on YouTube. And yeah, thank you for listening again, guys, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.